discussion here is on more specifics of the changes that you'll be seeing in the version 3 format for region 2. And so I'm going to go over it in a little bit more detail as to which sections changed, and as it was asked earlier, a lot of these changes, if not every single one of these changes, will be applied to the NY DEC format as well. Okay, so in the Region 2 format, the way it's set up is there are different groups, and then there are, within those groups, sections. What I've done here is I've highlighted the group headers, basically. And within the group headers, we have changed some of the terminology. The one towards the bottom that says chemistry used to be called lab, but since that data is a little bit more general, it can be used for sort of non-lab data as well, to report non-lab data. We renamed that section to chemistry. The vapor intrusion right above it is a new section in the format, in the version 3 format. And that's, again, vapor intrusion data has some sections on the building information. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. The field section hasn't really changed, and the one above that, at the very top, is called the initial EDD. Now, in the past, this initial EDD group had not been broken out of the other group. By calling these 4 files out in the top part of this as the first group, it is a little bit more consistent with the documentation, which says these other files that need to be submitted as part of the initial EDD. Okay, so within those groups, we have sections. So as we go through this discussion, I'm going to talk about groups and sections. And the section names have all been changed as well for version 3. And what you see here is at the very top, we have location instead of EPA R2 underscore or EPA R2 LOC underscore V2. We've used some common terminology to make it a little bit easier to understand what these sections are. How do I enter my SCRIBE data? So there is a SCRIBE format that can be requested using the email that's on the screen there, and that email address is also on the bottom of the EPA Region 2 web page. The sections, if you look at this, this format only has sections. It has not been broken out into groups. It's really just a bunch of sections here. Again, this has to be requested. This will not be on the download page, and the reason for that is because of the data requirements for the SCRIBE format are not as comprehensive as the Region 2 format requirements. This is a very simple set of data. So as far as being able to use this as a general format, really it needs to be for the people who are being required to use SCRIBE. This is not for basically general submittal. But this is available, again, if you request it using that email address. Okay, so what's new in the EPA Region 2 version 3 format? We've already looked at a little bit the rearranging of the groups and the changing of the names to common names. We'll go over some of the individual sections in the following slides and talk about what's been added and what's been removed, and some of the conditional checks in the format that have been modified. So common names for the section, as we said, these have all been changed to something that's more easily readable. This is in response to requests from the community to make this a little bit easier to go down through this format and figure out exactly which sections you need to report. and where that data would go in the format. This is also consistent with the New York DEC format. They have gone ahead and changed their naming scheme as well. Again, the chemistry section towards the bottom, that used to be the lab section. It was just renamed chemistry to make it a little bit more generic. It's not specific. It's not only for lab data. The vapor intrusion section, that has at the top of the vapor intrusion section, you can see a couple of sections that say building address and building. So that allows you to track basically like the metadata that goes along with that sampling information, all the metadata about the building, how thick is the slab, that type of information. The sections in the middle of the vapor intrusion where it says test result QC and batch, that is pretty much the same as the sample test result QC and batch in the chemistry section. The biggest difference is would be in the sample section. There's a couple of additional fields added which are specific to vapor intrusion, but the test result QC and the batches section match exactly the test result QC and batch section in the chemistry group. The reason that we put these sections in two places was for ease of use. We want to make sure that if you are submitting vapor intrusion data, you would have all your data sort of together in one group instead of your samples in this section and your test results in this other group. So we try to, even though it is a duplicate section, we really wanted it to be grouped together in one vapor intrusion group. So if you do receive data and it's in test results QC, it will load into either the vapor intrusion or the chemistry section. The section below that that says sample parameter, that's a new section added into the chemistry group that will allow you to track information such as fish sex, length, weight, just sort of metadata about the sample. And again, this is the changes that we're seeing are all in response to comments that EPA Region 2 receives on their format, and so this gets modified as a result of many of you contacting folks and saying, well, how do I report this data and how do I report that data? So EPA listens to what your suggestions are, and the changes come as a result of your suggestions. Okay, the chemistry group. So this was, again, formerly the lab group, but the chemistry group now contains the sample parameter, test result QC, and batch. We removed the section that says just test result. And the reason for that was that it was causing confusion. People weren't sure which section they should be reporting. The test result and test result QC were exactly the same for the first 49 columns. And the additional QC fields that were added, if you are not reporting those or have not been required to report those, and you have been receiving a test result file in the past, that test result file will load into the test result QC file. Okay, so that's a change to the chemistry or the old lab section. Okay, in the location and basic location sections, we also added in stream mile and stream code. Again, another requirement or a request from folks who have been reporting data to Region 2 that they need some place to track this information, and that was added in at the end of the location and basic location section. The last item down there was just a modification to the reference values for adding option 8 to the accuracy unit. Another change to the test result QC section, the column number is now a required field, and it is part of the primary key for that section. So that means that it must be populated. The way we handle that is if you're, again, receiving data from your lab and they have not populated that in the past, when you load that into the test results QC section, it will automatically populate it if it is null. It will populate it with NA. So if you load that in and and again you are not receiving that data from the lab, it will be defaulted to NA. The last item on that list says lab SDG, and the lab SDG was added into that test result QC section. The sample section contains a field called sample delivery group, and the sample delivery group at the sample level is typically used for the field crews. When the field crews assign a sample delivery group in the field on their samples, that would be tracked at the sample level. When the data goes to the lab and the lab has to send that data to another lab who specializes in a specific analysis, they would have a different SDG, and so it allows you to track multiple SDGs for a sample, and again, that's at the test and result level. So the test and results are typically, that would be data coming back from the lab. The field is not required, but it does allow the labs to have a little additional information or additional control over tracking the SDGs if they are different once they are assigned at the lab. Okay, so this is just saying that we've increased the lab sample ID to 40, and the descriptions for the quantitation limit and the method detection limits are now populated, and if that data is available, which we sure hope it is, that would be reported. Okay, in the past, the quantitation limit and the method detection limit, I believe, had some text in there that said something like not required or leave this null or something like that. But now there's a description in there, and that data should be reported, and usually is something that the method detection limit would be information that does come back from the lab. So if you have that, please make sure that you submit that as well. The column number is usually applies to mass GC spec data, where you're looking at first column confirmation or second column confirmation, or NA for non-applicable. So it has to do with identifying which column you're reading on the mass spectrometer. It is not related to the equipment. It's not equipment information like a part number. Another big change in the format for the chemistry section, the organic yes/no column has been removed, and basically it's been replaced with the validated yes/no column. There's a screenshot at the bottom that shows you the position, and that's the position for the test result QC section. It comes right after the interpreted qualifier, and again, it's in that same position as the organic yes/no. So if you have a data file, if you have an EDD that you receive from the lab and they are not using the most recent format and they leave organic yes/no in there, you need to make sure that you check your file that they have got the correct column in there, because if they put in organic yes, and that really indicates validated yes, that could be a problem. So this is probably, in my mind, one of the more significant changes in the format, because you want to make sure that that validated yes/no is populated correctly. There has been some conditional checks that have been added to the format as well to ensure that if the validated equals yes, and there's some additional conditional checks that are looking at the validated qualifier, the interpreted qualifier, and the lab qualifier. So if the lab qualifier is populated, the interpreted qualifier must be populated, and this will all be written up in the comprehensive manual, so you can refer to that if you have questions, or again, you can send questions into the EPA. The question is, has the version 3, EPA Region 2 version 3 format been pushed out to the CLP laboratory? And DESA. The CLP laboratory produces a file for Region 2, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. Their format, the file that they're pushing out doesn't affect how it gets loaded into this format. So I guess what I'm saying is that they don't need to have that information, because the file that they are they are sending will still load into the EPA Region 2 format. Usually what they send, though, is they send an organic file and then they send an inorganic file, right? Yeah. At least that's what I've seen. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, so that will be something that we take into account when we do the conversion into the EPA Region 2 format. Okay, so sample basic chemistry sections. There's just a couple of sample name and a few other fields that we've increased the characters, the number of characters that can be typed into those fields. So the next slide is, what is the EQuIS data processor? So the EQuIS data processor is a free tool that's provided by EPA Region 2 for checking compliance for your data, for your EDDs that you're submitting. You can download that EDP from the link as you see at the bottom there. If you have not been to that link before, there's a lot of information available, and the EPA Region 2 is very good about supplying a lot of resources to allow you to educate yourself on how you can accommodate or be in compliance and submit these EDDs. This is a screen capture from the web page. Again, there's a web page at the top. There's a download link for the documentation, and there's a download link for the EDP, the electronic data processor. Okay, the reason I'm pointing to both of these is because the comprehensive manual, there's a few manuals out there on their web page. There's the comprehensive manual, and then there's also this EDP specific user guide. The comprehensive manual has a lot of information in it, like, you know, how do I submit, what do I need to submit, what's the packaged, you know, what's in my initial submittal, that type of thing, and it has field descriptions and a lot of information along those lines. This EQuIS data processor user guide is just that. It's how to troubleshoot problems with EDP, how to load, how to basically use the EQuIS data processor. Okay, so again, there's a lot of resources out there on the Region 2 page. And you select that link to download the EDP, you will be brought to this screen where I'm pointing to there the EDP download, and then also there's the format and reference value download. The EDP download is the full EDP software plus the format, and then the one below it is just the format and the reference values. The reason we separate them is because the software doesn't change as often as the format changes, and I say that sort of loosely. It's not necessarily the format changing, but it's the reference values. We're updating the reference values on a regular basis, so this format here, the bottom link there, changes more often. As you can see, it's November 11th, 2010 for the 5.5 release of EDP, yet the format file was posted on the 14th of April this year. And again, we're getting ready to post it again at the end of next week. Okay, so if you download the software, you install it, and the first time you go to run it, it will say that you need to register the software. And there's a little button at the bottom where you say click here, and it will take you to a registration page. Once you fill out the information, you will receive an email response with the keys. Okay, the keys get pasted into that middle section right there that says new key code. Hit your save keys and you're all set. This is the page that you would need to fill out. They're basically just looking for some information on who are you, which EPA Region 2 or EPA Region 3 project are you working on. Again, this is the EPA Region 2 file format is being used for EPA Region 3 as well. And then again, you'd receive your keys and you paste them into that box that we're just looking at. If you download the format file and you already have EDP installed, then you will basically, that's a self-extracting zip. You need to take those files out of the self-extracting zip and put them into and replace the files that already exist on your hard drive. So here we're just showing sort of the standard path for install path for EDP, and as you can see, it's under EQuIS formats EPA Region 2. If you have requested some updated reference values, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but if you have requested updated reference values and the EPA staff here sends you an updated reference value file, and you can see the extension on that little highlighted file is RVF. That stands for Reference Value File. So if you receive one of those by email, you would replace this file with the new updated file. Okay? So what's available out on the EPA Region 2 webpage? Again, more resources. I think they've done a great job trying to make sure that these documents stay up to the most recent version. Part of the reason we're not rolling out the format until next week is to make sure that their manuals are up to date as well. So again, if you run EDP and you find that you're missing a reference value, what do? Well, you need to look at synonyms or variations. The EDP uses a CAS number and does not rely on the chemical name. So if you're used to seeing a specific chemical name and not the CAS number, you'll need to use a CAS number. Now, obviously, there are a lot of analytes that don't have CAS numbers, so there are unique values to identify those particular analytes. So that's why I say that you need to look at the list and look for synonyms or variations, because if you're doing pH, well, that's an easy one. It's going to be pH. But if you're doing TOC or total dissolved solids, is it in there as TDS? Is it in there, TOT dissolved or something along that line? So again, look at the name, look for variations, look for synonyms, and if you can't find an exact match, then you would go to this the website here. You can look on the valid value spreadsheet. You can look on the reference manual. You can search both of those. And I'm going to show you one other place you can look in a minute. So the New York State DEC has their own download page. And if you need to make a deliverable to them, I would recommend you get their naming convention. And I'll explain a little bit why in a few minutes. And it has to do with when you're packaging up your deliverable to send it to either New York State DEC or EPA Region 2 or EPA Region 3, they have a specific naming convention that's used, and when you package it up, we need to maintain that naming convention so that when it gets loaded, we know exactly which project it's going to be loaded into. So yes, DEC has their own download page and their own format with their own set of reference values. And the reference values should be pretty darn close. New York State DEC and EPA Region 2 and 3 have been working very hard together to make sure that there's a lot of consistency in the format and in the reference values so that it would be easy to make a deliverable to one or the other. So reference values. If you cannot find the reference value you're looking for, if it's coming up and giving you an error in your EDP, then you can, again, go online. There's an online form for requesting new reference values. Download this form, fill it out, email it to the email address at the bottom of the screen, and you will receive a confirmation that either it was accepted or the specific value you should use in its place. Now, this screen capture just shows, a small section. There's a whole bunch of specific sections there. This one's cast number, analyte, but there's also obviously methods and all sorts of additional reference values that you may need to request. Okay, so this slide is talking about what do I do with my locations that don't have coordinates. The EPA Region 2, actually the EPA requirements for locational data says that it must be in latitude and longitude. And what that means is that you would obviously need to submit it in latitude and longitude, but you need to give them some additional information on how you came up with that latitude and longitude value. Did you actually have it surveyed, or did you pick it off a map, or what was your collection method? If you do not have coordinates for your location, then at a minimum you need to decide where that's going to be. And what they recommend is, what EPA Region 2 is recommending, is you pick the center point of the facility and use that as your coordinate. Now, one of the things that they would ask you is, why don't you have a location? If it's just because it hasn't been surveyed, well, you could probably pick it off a map and get it fairly close. Or, and then you would use your collection method. You would define that you picked it off of a map. If it's because it's some historical data where you really don't have a clue where it is on the map or on the facility, then you would use the center point of the facility. But for historical data, it can be difficult. You may not have the exact surveyed location, but you should be able to you should be able to identify a rough position for that location. What I would say as far as the horizontal collection methods, look in that reference document, the reference value file, and it lists all the types, all the ways that you can identify how you picked those coordinates. And they do give you quite a variety of options. So there basically should be no excuse to not have coordinates, even if it's just the center of the facility. So the next couple of slides, we talk about some of the problems we've seen, like data that's come in, and some of the problems with that data that we've seen. So we're trying to address those issues as far as what we can try to avoid in the future. And Scott mentioned a few, which was great. I mean, thinking about your locations before you go out and sample, maybe trying to assist your field crews with the naming convention and that kind of sort of upfront attack on the project definitely helps the data managers on the back end before they have to submit that data. The first point there talks about the facility sites and locations. Scott had a good graphic that came right out of the EPA Region 2 documentation, comprehensive manual, that describes what is a facility, what are sites, And if you have any question on that, you can reference that document. I'm not going to go into that anymore in any more detail. The main point here is, again, the naming of those locations. And a location would be that sort of fixed point. Well, it would be a point, it has X, Y, Z, that you are going out to repeatedly and collecting a sample. And we have a question. Hold on. A transect, let's see, how is New York handling that? I think they're doing points along the transect, right? So they're doing locations, they're doing coordinates along the transect?
They get all the coordinates, yeah.
Right. So they're reporting multiple locations basically along that transect. So it would be something like TR1, TR2, TR3, or TR1A, B, C, D, and the coordinates for each of those. Average air along a route. See, that would be the sample, so the whole transect. That one I might need to think about. We're actually compiling a list of questions from the first session as well, and the air I'm not sure about. I'd have to find out how we'd handle it. Obviously, the sample part of that, the air sample, we can handle. The how you would report the location is really what we'd need to figure out exactly. The reason I say that is because the air sample, there are the ability to say what the duration of the sample is. So if you were, if you did it over an hour or 2 days or 3 days or whatever, however long it took you to run that transect, you can track that information in the sample record. Now that may need to be done in the vapor intrusion, but I'm not sure. I'd have to check on that. If it was a sample, like say you're doing a sample on across the stream or something like that, where you're taking a transect and then you take samples along each one of those, or maybe you do like the edge, the middle, and the opposite edge of the stream, that would be 3 locations and 3 samples. And you'd need to report those locations, with coordinates. The question is, if you have a facility that has MW1 and you want to collect data from a nearby facility that also has an MW1, how would you handle that? Well, you would probably want your primary on your facility to be called MW1. The data coming in from this other source, you would need to you'd need to have a different identifier for that location code. So you could call it, there might be some, I'm trying to think of what would be an identifier. If it was a facility that you could use the initials or something, where you could say MW1 underscore the initials of the facility, but it would have to be unique. You could not put in another MW1. Now, when they do a cross-facility query, they'll be able to see that, yes, we've got 2 wells that are named differently and they're right on top of each other. But it won't mess it up, because you're going to take your sample and their sample, and they'll be running their reports based on the same well that's named differently. And again, when they do a cross-facility query, we sort of ignore the location naming, because you could very easily have many MW1s as you're doing cross-facility queries. But within that facility, it has to be unique. The only thing here I want to mention is if you pick up a site that's an existing site and you need to make sure that you're getting ready to go out and do some sampling, or you're scheduling some sampling, you can talk to your RPM and make sure you request the existing location naming convention that they're using, and they can also provide the coordinates with that as well, so that you can pop those up and go, all right, I know where those locations are, I know what the coordinates are, and if they've already got an MW1, you won't go out and drill a new well called MW1, or just renumber everything, rename everything. Okay, again, that can be requested from your RPM, and that data can be provided in a spreadsheet or basically a PDF or anything like that. QC data. QC data such as a trip blank does not need a location code. It needs a unique sample code, but you should not be assigning a location code of TB for a trip blank. The trip blank location code should be null. We have had people submit location codes called TB, and that's why we're bringing it up. But please make sure that you do not submit a location record for the trip blanks. Okay, so sample codes. Every sample must have a unique sample code. What does that mean? When you go out to a location, you take a sample, and the location code may be MW1, but your sample code would not be MW1. A sample code should not equal a location code. Your location does not change. Every time you go out to your sample, you hope that it's going to change. So your sample code would change. Okay, it's a unique sample every time you go to that one location. Okay. Now, I wrote in here that concatenating the really basic way of creating a unique sample code would be concatenating a location code with a sample date and possibly a depth, or a sample date and time plus a depth. And in the first session, somebody said, well, then you can't send it blind to the lab, and that's true. So if you are concerned about making sure that your samples are sent to the lab blind, then using the location code as part of the naming scheme for your sample codes is not a good idea. And there are multiple ways of creating unique sample codes, and I'm not going to discuss all the sort of variations of that. The point is that the unique sample code must be maintained, and the next time you go out to that very same well, you need to create another unique sample code. Okay, so it's not by submittal. Like if you submit data for 1 quarter, the next time you go out to the next quarter, when you go out there and sample, you will have a new set of sample codes. Same locations, new samples. Trip blanks, equipment blanks, field blanks, they need to have a unique sample code too. You cannot submit something that just says TB for your trip blank or EB for your equipment blank. Any of the QC like that has to have a unique sample code as well. And the easiest way to obtain that is to do, as I have an example on the bottom, the trip blank plus the date and time, or the date here, but the date and time if necessary. If you put in there that your sample type is N for normal sample, then the format will prompt you to have a location code. It should not be N. If it's a normal sample, it should be, if it's a normal sample, it should be N. If it's some kind of QC, you need to put in the correct QC designations such as TB, trip blank, EB, equipment blank, FB, field blank, etc. And if you put in that correct code, it will not prompt you for a location code. One of the additional requirements for the EPA Region 2 version 3 format is that if you have site-specific action levels, you need to report them. And I will show you how you report them, but you need to report them, and there will be on the EPA Region 2 download page a little file that is the action level file. We keep it separate from the whole format because we didn't feel that it needed to be added into the whole format. So it is a separate format that you would load into EDP, and you can use that to just report the site-specific action levels. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you get that and attach that to your whole submittal in a minute. This is the screen capture showing the action level format. As you can see, it's got 2 sections, no groups, just 2 sections. The action level section that's highlighted there basically allows you to put in general information, you know, the sort of the top level information. This is the action level, blah, blah, blah. And then the action level parameter allows you to put in every parameter and its level in that second section there that says action level parameter. So the question is, do you put in screening levels in the action levels, or do you put it in post-ROD? Is that what you said?
Post-ROD, where you actually have action levels.
Hold on 1 minute, please.
I think that if you are in post-ROD, we definitely want to see the ARRs there. So that's whatever is listed in the ROD. Now, if you are pre-ROD, then maybe we would like to do it on a site-by-site specific basis. So contact your project manager if it's pre-ROD, but definitely post-ROD we would like to see the ARRs.
Alrighty. Okay, CLP conversion tool. We talked about this a little bit earlier. This is a tool that is part of the Region 2 format, and this was developed as a result of the data providers' comments on, you know, having difficulty taking the data that's coming out of the EPA Region 2 DAT editor and getting it into the EPA Region 2 format. So what we did is we worked out the logic with the EPA Region 2 lab folks to make sure that they will deliver, and this is actually 2 years ago now. I think this is live 2 years ago. They will deliver a spreadsheet with the data in a big, long, like sample test results all out in one row. And then what we do is when the data comes into, well, I'll say we, but the data providers, when they receive that data, they would take that spreadsheet, add the extension .clp, and then so it would be, you know, whatever the file name is, .clp, .xls, because it's an Excel spreadsheet. And when that file, when you try to load that file into the EDP, it will look at that extension and say, oh, I'm receiving a CLP file. I will take it and pull it apart and basically load it into the EDP Region 2 format. With version 3, that'll work the same way. Okay. Now, the data coming out of the DAT editor is only as good as what goes into the DAT editor. So there's definitely information that is not provided to the Region 2 lab. So they only spit out what they get in. So for example, they may not know location data. They would not know the data provider. They may not know the sampler, the sampling company code. So there's definitely additional information that the DAT editor does not have, or was not provided to them. So when they get when they spit out their file, we load in exactly what they have. So again, this tool was developed for the data providers. This is not something that EPA Region 2 themselves run, because when they get the data, it has to be a complete package without errors. And the result of the data coming out of the DAT editor does not create a complete package without errors. Okay, if you need some additional information on how to use this conversion tool, there's an instructional video. And I just put a little, again, there's a link I'm putting up there 50 million times, and there's the area where you can download the video. So again, the conversion tool will load what it receives. It does not create data. It cannot create data. Okay, so if there is no data provider, then there will be no data provider when we translate that information into the EPA Region 2 format. If you look at, excuse me, if you look at the screen and the bottom left of the chemistry section, chemistry group, you'll see that once the data is loaded into the, translated using this conversion tool and loaded into the EPA Region 2 format, version 3 format, you'll see it populates the sample, test result, and the batch section. And you will also see that the sample and test result QC sections both show red, which indicate that there are errors. This is usually incomplete data, or it could be data where the data may exceed the field length. The data may not have used the EPA valid values. And again, this is not an issue with the EPA Region 2 lab. They are processing what they get. Okay? So what they're outputting is consistent with what they receive for data. Now, the CLP conversion tool is basically works in conjunction with, like I said, the data coming out of the DAT editor, but that also is sort of like a translator for that Forms 2 Lite, because a lot of times the data going into the DAT editor is data that was run through the Forms 2 Lite. So there are some additional information that you probably need to look at in that documentation as to how we're handling the sample names and how we're handling the location codes and whatnot in that little conversion tool. Okay? If you look at the screen on the right side under sample code, you can see that there's at the very bottom there's an LCSS underscore, and then there's a date and an underscore SO. We do concatenate some data to create a syssample code. Now I realize I said we don't create data, but what we're doing is concatenating a couple of fields to create a unique sample code for QC data where we would typically be receiving something like LCS, LCSS, and we're maintaining the original name that was received in other columns. So the data are all there, and that's why we recommend you look at the documentation and the video that support this little conversion tool. Yes? Okay, so the question is, does EDP truncate the data when reading it in from the CLP file? The answer is no, but it will show as an error. So one of the things that we saw when we were testing this out was a COC, a chain of custody. The field for chain of custody was really, really long. It was like a chain of custody that was 60 or 70 characters long. However, the EPA Region 2 format has a restriction, and I don't know exactly what it is, but it's probably like 20 or 30 or 40 or something, but it's not 60 or 70. So it doesn't truncate it. It shows as an error that field exceeds the length. And if you put your mouse over it or hover over it, it will show you the full length. So if you saved it from there, just saved it out to an Excel spreadsheet, I was going to say it truncates it, but I bet it doesn't truncate it because that's how you're receiving it. It's going to save what it has, but again, you load it into this EDP, and it is still going to be a violation of the format. You're going to see it as an error because it doesn't fall into the requirements for the EPA Region 2 format. So it won't truncate it because you need to deal with it and figure out how to truncate it to make sense. But we leave that responsibility up to the data provider. We try not to do that in anywhere ourselves. Okay, so is there any way to fill in a value for the whole column? And the example on the screen shows data provider as being null. And within EDP, there's a search and replace. So you could highlight that whole column, and you could say search null, replace with whatever the code is. And it will replace that whole column. Again, I think EPA Region 2 and EPA Region 3 have been very good about listening to your comments, and they are very eager to make this work and to just the fact that they put this CLP conversion tool in there. Took them a long time to work through the logic to get this in there, and it's not something that the EPA Region 2 staff uses themselves. Again, it's solely for the purpose of the data providers being able to accommodate the different requirements from the different agencies, the different groups within the agency. Okay, I'm going to move along. TICs. How do we handle TICs? Okay, so the way EPA Region 2 and 3 are using the format to handle TICs is they really want you to report, in most cases, they want you to report only the 10 highest concentrations per group. And a group would be, they're grouping sort of, as you can see underneath the example for the group names, unknown VOA 1, unknown VOA 2, unknown VOA 3, so it's 1 through 10, unknown VOA 1 through 10, unknown aromatic 1 through 10. And if you have any question as to what's available there, if you go look in that RT analyte table at the very bottom under U, if it's sorted alphabetically, you will see that the grouping of all the different, or the names for all the different groups. Okay? There's one or two situations where they are looking for the top 20 highest concentrations, but for the most part, it's the top 10 highest concentrations. Okay? And you need to make sure that your result type code equals TIC. In most cases, it comes in or defaults to TRG, which is target normal result, but you need to identify that as a TIC as well. It is to your benefit to make sure that your lab are using this naming convention. Okay, if the lab uses some other naming convention, such as a CAS number with the retention time tacked on to the end, that is not good, and that is not acceptable as a valid value to the EPA Region 2 or Region 3 format. So you need to make sure you coordinate with your lab that it gets reported using these groups of unknown VOA, unknown alkane, that type of thing. Any questions on TICs? Okay, so what is the process for handling samples from two different labs with the same sample code? So the sample level data should be the same. The SDG, as we talked about earlier, would be handled at the test result level. Let me step back. So if it's a split, then you need to name the sample differently. It needs to have a unique naming convention. If it's a sample that's being sent to one lab for analysis on radioactive type of analysis and another lab for metals, that's the same sample going to two different labs for analysis. The sample code can be the same, and it should not be causing a duplicate. What's possible is that when you appended the sample section, you did append two sets of samples, but there should be no difference between the information that's presented from one lab as you're getting from another lab. The difference is in the test results and QC and batch information. So the sample level should be the same, the test level and the test result QC and the batch would be different. So you're really appending, you'd load one sample level data and then you load the test results from both labs. Now again, this isn't like a duplicate. Okay, a duplicate, that would truly be two different samples, and that truly needs to have two unique sample codes. One sample code for the normal sample and a different sample code for the duplicate. So if it's one sample, okay, so you're saying that the lab name code is different. So again, you're right, you would have a different sample, you would have a different test level data, because at the test level you're identifying which lab did the analysis. And we added in that lab SDG, so you could also include the unique lab SDG. But at the sample level, and to my knowledge, at the sample level, that should all be, again, just basic sample information. It does not include the lab information, which is the lab code, the lab ID, and all that information. That's down at the test result and test result QC level. So again, what you would do is load in the sample, and then you would load in your sample, test result, QC, and batch. And then from the second lab, you append the test result, QC, and batch information. Okay, so sign and submit EDDs. Okay, this would go back to the question we had earlier about how close are the New York format and the EPA Region 2 and Region 3 format. And when I said pretty darn close, they are very, very close. The reason you would need to download the New York format and download separately the EPA Region 2 format is this section here, how we package it up for submitting to either of those agencies. Okay? The naming scheme for the facilities at New York DEC is different than the naming scheme for the facilities at EPA Region 2. And this section here packages up the data that you submitted, or that you want to submit, and when you get to this screen, you type in the username, the password, and when you select the program code, it will automatically populate the registry ID, and you'll be prompted for a location to save that, and it will zip all that information together and save it. Now, if you have files such as the action level files, the DXF for the map, if you were submitting a log that's like a paper log, if you have files like that, those would go into the file section, and I'm going to show that in a minute when I bring up EDP. Those will go into the file section. When you say sign and submit, it will go out and take a copy of that file and package it as well into the zip file so that it's ready to submit. Now the nice part about this is when EPA Region 2 or New York or Region 3 receive the file, they can load that zip. Because of the naming convention that we have implemented in this section here, the sign and submit, it will know exactly which section of the format to load that EDD into. Okay, so again, it's specific. If you open up that zip and look in there, you will see a section that says location, V3. The name of the file, when you hit save, will be formatted exactly how it needs to be formatted, so that the agencies can do an automated data load, which means they can submit it through their enterprise, EQuIS Enterprise, or it can be loaded internally to them. They can put it up on the server, and that way it gets loaded automatically. So this section is very important to make sure that you are using this, using the format for that agency, so that the actual EDD gets packaged up correctly. Correct naming of the file, correct naming of the files within the zip file, and packaging up any additional files, photos, logs, DXF, anything like that that you're also including with that package. This is a summary. Why is it important? Mainly the naming convention. It allows the agencies to do an automated data load. It makes it easier. It associates your facility and your project with those files. It creates a nice little package to be submitted. Okay. The important thing, I'm going to go back one slide on step 3. If you are submitting to Region 2, and I do not know that this is the case for New York DEC, I don't believe it is, but if you're submitting to EPA Region 2, you do need to rename the file from star.zip to star.piz. If you do not name that, it will be stripped off when it comes into the EPA. Okay, again, it packages it up, makes a nice little package, easy to submit. All right, that's all I had for my slide presentation. Are there any questions before I move on to EDP and open up the application and show you some of these sections that we've been discussing? The question is, do I include the cover letter in the file section? And sure, you can do that. You can submit the cover letter. That's a great question. We hadn't discussed that internally here with the EPA folks. However, when we finalize the documentation, we'll make sure we note how to package that up and where you can put that. Right now, what the staff here is telling me that yes, you can put that in with the file section and submit your cover letter that way. So the question is, if you have purchased the export format from EarthSoft for the EPA Region 2 format, will that be updated as well? And yes, that has been updated already, and that will be available as soon as the EPA Region 2 format is rolled out. So the question is, will there be email notification of that? To my knowledge, EPA Region 2 is not notifying folks, not proactively going out and notifying folks that there's been a new format posted. That is something that is a request we've heard before. We may try to work towards making that more of an automatic, that an email gets broadcast. However, that is not in place right now, so I do apologize. We can discuss it here. I can discuss it with the staff here when we're getting ready to roll this out, but I would say for this version right now, that is not in place. So on the EarthSoft webpage, there's a community center, and there's a topic forum on the EarthSoft webpage community center for New York DEC, and they use that to broadcast when there's been a change. We can certainly do that for Region 2 as well. You would need to subscribe to the EarthSoft Community Center. And you can get to that by going to the EarthSoft homepage, and there's a link on the right-hand side, I believe. Good question. So the question is, has EPA Region 2 been successful getting data from their database to the New York State DEC? And the answer is yes. They use this export that we were just talking about. They export data, and then New York State DEC basically just loads it up into EDP and imports the data. The comment was there may be a few valid values that were different. That's handled on the New York State side. But other than that, it's again, they've worked very hard to keep these two formats in sync, and they've done a great job at trying to move both of the formats forward at the same time. It's a tricky balance to keep both the New York State folks and the EPA folks, in sync as they both try to move the format forward.